Are you a pantser or an outliner? When you're writing a novel or even a short story, you want to pre-write before you start your actual writing. There are two schools of thought. Number one, you have your pantsers. Now, these are people, pantser is short for flying by the seat of your pants. These are people who are going to do minimal to no outlining before they start writing. Essentially, they just start typing and seeing what comes up. And there's an advantage to that and a disadvantage to that. Now, on the other hand, you have your outliners. There are some really hardcore outliners out there who are going to go through every single chapter and outline every bit of what's going to happen before they do any actual writing. Either way, pre-writing is a very important part of the process. So I'm going to take you through today what I do when I am pre-writing for my next novel, which I've just titled for now. This is just going to be called The Vital Link Part 3 until I can come up with the title that I want to use. Now, I've considered myself more of a pantser when I started. I considered myself more like I had a very quick idea and I just asked myself a question. I just said, what if there was a robot in the wasteland that wakes up after the world has been destroyed? What would that robot actually be experiencing? Because a robot is going to basically have the unique ability to see the way that the world was before it ended and to see the way it is after it ends. Very few, if any, people will be able to live long enough to have told you what has happened in both scenarios. And from there, I thought about other characters. I did use the first couple of seasons of The Walking Dead to say, like, what would happen if there was a family of people that needed to survive in this wasteland? What if there's a civilization of people that is trying to unearth old technology? So these are questions that I just started asking myself. So I want to start out first by saying, if you're trying to write a novel or a series, the first thing you need to do is ask yourself some questions. Like I said, things like, who's the main character? What is their background story? How do these characters meet? What's the premise behind everything? Now, if you're writing a series like I am, something that I'm learning as I'm going is these questions don't ever stop. The fact is that I'm still asking myself questions, and I'm going to take you through that today because I use a very particular app to help me with this, because I would not be able to remember everything if I decided to just start writing off the top of my head. Over time, I've actually gone from just a pantser, which I think is a little more of a novice way to write, I've learned really is not going to be sustainable if you're writing a series. But then on the other hand, I feel like as an outliner, I don't like to box myself in too much. In my first novel, a particular character dies towards the end, and if you haven't read The Vital Link, please pick it up and check it out. Tell me what you think. There's a character at the end who dies, who originally I was going to have a completely different character die. But along the way, while writing that original character, I ended up loving him so much that I just couldn't see him die. I will eventually probably have to come back to that character, and I don't want to go back to that character and tell you who that is until maybe I've really decided on what I want to do. I like to think of the two schools of thought, the pantsers and the outliners, and I can look to be in the middle somewhere. I like to outline to a certain point, but then after a while, I just like to get into the fun of interacting with the characters in the novel itself. All right, so here's what I like to use whenever I can. This is called a Scrivener if you've never used it before. When I was trying to pre-write for the second novel and towards the end of the first where I was trying to keep track of everything, I tried it on Microsoft Word. The Microsoft Word is actually very limited in its ability to help you keep track of all these things. I'm not trying to make it sound like Microsoft Word isn't good. It's great for a lot of things. But when you're talking about writing a novel and creating chapters and having a table of contents and things like that, it does get to be a little weighty. So I looked online and on the internet to find some great self-publishing tools or apps that I could use to help me along the way. Scrivener had a few great features right off the bat. I was really looking for some kind of virtual index card type of situation, and this actually really has that in spades. It has folders, it has sketches, it has things that will help me keep track of everything in this world, because my world is original in the sense that it's got original landmarks, places, people, objects, and things like that. The other thing about Scrivener that I love is that it was a one-time fee. When I bought it, maybe it was 2 years ago, it was $45. Even if the full price is $60 with the amount of features that it has, I think it's totally worth it. So on your left-hand side, you see that there is a novel format. Right here, this is my folder for the next part of the story, novel 3. And then you can see that underneath that, I've got several different storylines that I started to flesh out. And in each of the storylines, there are going to be subsections where I can put in texts and I can write in little notes as I go. But I will show you some things, like here, this is highways, right? Over here, you could write the highways. I wrote it on the right-hand side. There are different interregional highways, so IR-79, IR-78, things like that really help. Just because when I'm trying to create the landmarks and I'm trying to create the geography of the world, obviously, if I write the interregional 79 is on the left side of the country and then it's on the right side of the country, just that continuity error does start to look like, or could start to look like, a writer doesn't really know their story. So even though that might be a small thing, if you do that enough, people are going to start questioning your dedication to your own world. So the Iron Pirates are characters that you meet in the second novel. And when you see the galleon, that's the main flagship, right? So I wrote down some notes about what I think it should look like. And now I can actually take this and I can use it and keep this app open while I'm writing the story. So I can look back and say, okay, I wrote in here it stood 2 to 3 stories high by his estimate. Once they get onto the ship, you could actually see how big it is. But at least for this, I'm able to look back and forth as I'm writing and check my work as I go. Because the fact is, you might write something like it was made of copper and tin in chapter 2, and then forget it was made of copper and tin, and on chapter 7, you write that it was made of steel, and that is going to throw off readers. So again, try to keep that continuity as much as you can within the bounds of the story. So another thing I did, as I have a lot of mechanicals and mechanical types in my world, so I wanted to keep track of them, obviously, so that I can make sure I'm describing them accurately. If you look at the scrapper part, it says we have some used numbers here, 205, 229, 191, and in parentheses, Tim, 232, Jill. So that's part of the story as well. You can see you can add a new item, right? Now, if you're in a folder, which are the blue rectangles on the side, you can go to new text. So I'm just going to add one in this one just for argument's sake. And under Metal Folk, it goes all the way to the bottom, and you'll notice that the folder goes away. So if I double tap on the untitled document, I could write something like, mechanical fish. I'm making it up, right? So there are a couple of places I could put some information. Now, what I started to do is I would write in here, this is where you're going to see your index card. I'll zoom out in a second and show you. Your basic index card, you're going to see some information. But then also on this side, this is so invaluable. The notes section. If I'm writing about something, let's say I'm writing about this mechanical fish, I might write some questions to myself, like where does it live? I might say who encounters it. I might be talking about, is it friendly? And then underneath that, I could say, I don't think it's friendly. And then maybe as I'm writing this, I'll say to myself, oh, you know what? I think the exhumers are actually going, there's a lake nearby that I had just described. Like maybe I'll say that they're going towards a certain area. And as I'm describing it, I'm giving various flora and fauna descriptions. And one of them might be that there's a lake nearby. Well, what would they want to do in that lake? Well, they might need to wash themselves up. They might need to drink from it or boil the water to drink from it, whatever the case may be. It should never be something that doesn't make sense for that group. So if it's a bunch of really serious, hardened soldiers, unless you've established that those characters maybe have some childlike qualities, you can't just suddenly have them go flying into the lake and start splashing each other with water. So now I've asked myself a few questions. Now the mechanical fish here, this might be, robot fish is 6 feet long, swallows people whole. And then I also have to remember, what was the purpose of this fish? Before the war happened and everything went errant, what would this type of fish be doing? Maybe this fish's job was to keep the population of other fish down, or maybe this fish's job was to keep other predators away from other fish. I'm just thinking of questions. Okay, so now let's say I want to go back out. I go to Metal Folk, and now, look, I've got mechanical fish here, and here are the notes that I just wrote about, right? But if I want to see the notes, then I would click on it, right? So I would just click on it, do one click, and now I've got these little notes. So I consider the notes section like Post-its. I consider this section like an index card. I don't think that this is a very good word processor, more like a valid formatting software. If you find a way that you want to use this that is more engrossing, then by all means go for it. For me, this is more like my briefcase. Of all the things that I might need to access while I'm writing, it does help to have a separate app or a separate program between this one and my writing software so that I can jump back and forth. Then you could also use storyline drafts. You've got front matter. You could go with paperback, ebook, manuscript format. And then over here, it tells you what metadata is to help you if you decided to use Scrivener as a word processor as well as a note keeper. This is basically what I've been doing. As I go along in the series, I'm actually doing more outlining before I'm doing any writing. So what has happened in the past is I'll just come up with an idea, I'll write a few sentences out, and then I'll just write. I'll just see where it takes me. But now I feel like I need to hone my energy into what is most important about the stories and the storylines. Now, to be honest, I didn't really do it this way until recently. Before, I was using my formatting software, which I'll show you in the next part, and I would open up chapters and use them as basically their own mini pre-writing before I wrote that chapter. But now I'm seeing a need to do all of this together first. And the more I lay the groundwork in advance, I think the faster and more efficient I'll be at writing this story. Are you a pantser or an outliner? Or are you some combination of both, like I find myself being? In part 2, I'm going to talk about the app that I use when I actually start to write, and I'll show you some examples of what that looks like from the other stories. Stay tuned, and I'll see you then.